He's vowed that starting on August 1st, he will impose a 35% tariff on all Canadian goods going to the U.S. Now, that's separate from the current sectoral tariffs. Trump goes on to say in that letter that if Canada raises its tariffs, quote, whatever number you choose to raise them by will be added onto the 35% that we charge.
Good evening, and welcome to our latest political and economic update. Just hours ago, the trade war between the United States and Canada escalated to a boiling point, with Canada announcing a 35% tariff threat on U.S. goods in retaliation to President Donald Trump's aggressive trade policies. Trump is, to put it bluntly, freaking out, and the fallout is hitting American consumers where it hurts most, their wallets. Markets are reeling, businesses are scrambling, and the U.S.-Canada trade relationship, worth over $760 billion annually, is teetering on the edge of chaos. Tonight, we're diving deep into this escalating crisis, unpacking why Canada's fighting back, how Trump's reacting, and what this means for American families, farmers, and industries. Buckle up, because this is a high-stakes showdown with no easy way out. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to stay on top of the latest developments. Let's set the stage. Canada's 35% tariff threat, announced late yesterday, is a direct response to Trump's decision to slap a 35% tariff on Canadian goods, set to take effect on August 1, 2025. Trump took to Truth Social, calling Canada's move a betrayal and economic sabotage, vowing to hit back with even higher tariffs if Ottawa follows through. He's warned of levies as high as 50% or more, accusing Canada of ripping off American workers and exacerbating the U.S. trade deficit, which stood at $63.3 billion with Canada in 2024. This tit-for-tat tariff war is no minor spat. It's threatening to disrupt one of the world's most integrated trade relationships, with Canada as the top buyer of U.S. goods, importing $349 billion last year, and the third largest supplier, exporting $412.7 billion to the U.S. Why is Canada pushing back so hard? To understand, we need to look at Trump's trade offensive. Since taking office, he's doubled down on his America First agenda, using tariffs to pressure trading partners into concessions. In February, he imposed a 25% tariff on non-USMCA-compliant Canadian goods, followed by 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum in June, and a 25% levy on autos and auto parts in March. Trump's latest move, a blanket 35% tariff on all Canadian goods announced last week, was the final straw for Ottawa. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney called it a direct attack on Canadian workers, vowing to protect his country's export-dependent economy. Canada's counter tariffs target $155 billion in U.S. goods, including steel, aluminum, dairy, meat, and consumer products like apparel and computers, aiming to hit American industries hard. The impact on U.S. consumers is immediate and brutal. Canada's 35% tariff threat means higher prices for everyday goods. Take dairy, for example. Canada's supply management system already limits U.S. dairy exports, but these new tariffs could make American cheese, milk, and yogurt nearly unaffordable north of the border. A gallon of U.S. milk, already facing a 250% Canadian tariff, could see its price in Canada jump another 35%, pricing out American brands. This isn't just about exports. Retaliatory tariffs mean U.S. consumers will pay more for Canadian imports like maple syrup, which faces a potential 10% U.S. tariff, but could climb higher if the trade war escalates. A $10 bottle of Canadian maple syrup could hit $13.50 in U.S. stores by September. Aluminum, a key Canadian export, is another sore spot. Used in everything from cars to beer cans, its price could rise 20%, driving up costs for a six-pack or a new vehicle.
Let's not forget that President Trump has declared an economic war on every single business, every single person in this country. And we need to do everything we can to fight against him.
American businesses are feeling the heat. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce estimates that Canada's tariffs could cost American exporters $50 billion annually, with small businesses hit hardest. A Michigan auto parts supplier, for instance, could see its $100,000 contract with a Canadian manufacturer shrink as tariffs make U.S. parts less competitive. The National Association of Manufacturers warns that 500,000 U.S. jobs, from steelworkers in Pennsylvania to farmers in Wisconsin, are at risk. Dairy farmers, already struggling with Canada's restrictive trade barriers, face a new blow. Wisconsin exported $150 million in dairy to Canada last year, but these tariffs could cut that by half. The ripple effect is clear: higher costs, fewer jobs, and tighter margins for businesses already grappling with inflation. Markets are in a frenzy. When Canada's tariff threat hit, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 250 points, a 0.5% slide, while the S&P 500 and NASDAQ dipped 0.4% and 0.2% respectively. Canadian markets weren't spared. The S&P TSX Composite fell 2.1%, with auto and metal stocks like Magna International and Tech Resources down 5 and 6%. Investors are jittery because Canada's not just any trading partner. It's the backbone of North American supply chains. 3/4 of Canada's exports go to the U.S., and 60% of U.S. crude oil imports come from Canada. A 35% tariff could disrupt these flows, raising gas prices by 10 to 15 cents per gallon, according to Goldman Sachs. The U.S. dollar strengthened against the Canadian loonie, which hit a 5-year low, but that's cold comfort when supply chains are buckling. Trump's justification for his tariffs is twofold: trade deficits and fentanyl. He's long complained about Canada's $63.3 billion trade surplus with the U.S., driven largely by oil and auto exports. In his Truth Social letter to Carney, he accused Canada of failing to stop fentanyl smuggling, claiming it fuels America's opioid crisis. But data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection undercuts this. Only 43 pounds of the 21,900 pounds of fentanyl seized last year came through the Canadian border, a mere 0.2%. Carney fired back on X, saying Canada has made vital progress on fentanyl, investing $1.3 billion in border security and appointing a fentanyl czar to address U.S. concerns. He called Trump's claims unjustified, pointing out that most fentanyl enters the U.S. through Mexico, not Canada. Canada's tariff threat isn't just about economics, it's political. Carney, who won Canada's federal election in April 2025 on a platform of resisting U.S. economic pressure, is under fire at home. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre called the tariffs unjustified and urged unity to secure the best deal for Canada. Unifor, representing 320,000 Canadian workers, labeled Trump's tactics extortion, demanding Ottawa stand firm. Canada's already retaliated before, slapping $20.7 billion in tariffs on U.S. goods in March and 25% levies on non-USMCA autos in April. This latest 35% threat targets a broader range of U.S. exports, from Kentucky bourbon to California tech, designed to pressure red states where Trump's base is strongest. Carney's team is betting that hitting U.S. consumers and businesses will force Trump to the negotiating table.
As of July, the U.S. effective tariff rate is over 20%. That's the highest level seen in over 100 years. Here with more on the ways this will affect how companies do business and the effect on the U.S. economy is...
The fallout for U.S. consumers goes beyond price hikes. Take autos. Canada's 25% tariff on non-USMCA compliant U.S. vehicles, now potentially rising to 35%, could make American-made cars like Ford F-150s pricier in Canada, reducing demand. This hits U.S. auto workers in states like Michigan, where 50,000 jobs depend on Canadian exports. Energy is another pain point. Canada supplies 60% of U.S. crude oil imports, and while energy tariffs are currently at 10%, a broader trade war could disrupt supplies, pushing gas prices toward $4 a gallon. Food prices are climbing too. Canadian imports like seafood and grains face U.S. tariffs, but Canada's counter tariffs could make staples like bread and frozen fish 15% more expensive for Americans by fall. The broader economic picture is grim. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce projects that a 25% tariff on U.S. imports could shrink Canada's GDP by 2.6%, or $78 billion, costing $1,900 per Canadian annually. But the U.S. isn't spared. Trump's tariffs could cut U.S. GDP by 1.6%, or $467 billion, costing Americans $1,300 per person yearly. A full-blown trade war could push both economies into recession by mid-2026, with small businesses and rural communities hit hardest. In Iowa, farmers already grappling with corn prices at $3.74 per bushel face losing Canada, their third largest market, as tariffs make U.S. grain uncompetitive. The National Retail Federation warns that U.S. households could lose $78 billion in purchasing power annually as prices rise. Trump's not backing down. In an NBC interview, he hinted at doubling tariffs on other trading partners to 15% to 20%, up from the current 10% baseline. He sent similar letters to over 20 countries, from Japan to South Africa, threatening levies of 25% to 50%. His deal with Indonesia, setting a 19% tariff, shows he's willing to negotiate, but only on his terms. Trump's also targeting the EU, promising new tariffs by August 1st, accusing Brussels of screwing the U.S. with a $161 billion trade deficit. The EU's preparing $84 billion in counter tariffs, and Canada's move signals other allies may follow suit, creating a multi-front trade war that could cripple global markets. What's driving Trump's strategy? It's a mix of economic nationalism and political posturing. Tariffs rally his base by projecting strength, but they're a gamble. Economists warn that tariffs raise consumer prices and slow growth. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell cited tariffs as a reason for holding interest rates steady this year. Trump's first term showed mixed results. His 2018 tariffs on steel and aluminum created 12,000 U.S. jobs, but raised costs for manufacturers, costing consumers $900 million annually. This time, the scale is bigger and the stakes are higher. If Canada's tariffs go through, U.S. exporters could lose $100 billion in sales, with ripple effects across supply chains. Canada's not alone in pushing back. Mexico, facing a 30% U.S. tariff, has threatened retaliatory duties on $100 billion in U.S. goods. Japan and South Korea, hit with 25% tariffs, are diversifying trade to avoid U.S. dependence. Even allies like the UK, which secured a partial tariff exemption, face uncertainty as Trump's reciprocal tariffs loom. The global trade map is being redrawn, with countries like Vietnam and Thailand cutting deals to lower U.S. tariffs while rerouting supply chains through transshipping. This could leave the U.S. isolated, with higher costs and fewer markets for its goods. For American workers, the picture is bleak. In Ohio, steel workers gained from Trump's 50% tariffs on Canadian metals, but retaliatory tariffs threatened 20,000 jobs in related industries, like auto manufacturing. In California, tech firms face Canada's 35% tariffs on computers, potentially cutting $5 billion in exports. Rural communities, already stretched by low commodity prices, could see farm bankruptcies surge. In Wisconsin, lost 500 farms in 2024. And these tariffs could double that. The Economic Institute estimates that a U.S.-Canada trade war could cost 1 million jobs by 2027, with manufacturing and agriculture hit hardest. The clock is ticking toward August 1st. Carney says Canada's negotiating in good faith, but Trump's hardline stance leaves little room for compromise. He's offered a slim olive branch, saying he'd consider adjusting tariffs if Canada cracks down on fentanyl. But his broader demands, eliminating Canada's supply management system and reducing the trade deficit, are non-starters for Ottawa. Carney's team is banking on U.S. businesses and consumers, pressuring Trump to back off as prices rise. But with Trump's base cheering his tough talk, he may double down, risking a deeper economic crisis. So where does this leave us? American consumers are staring down higher prices for everything from gas to groceries. Businesses face shrinking markets and rising costs. Farmers, workers, and small-town economies are on the brink. Canada's 35% tariff threat is a warning shot, but it's also a plea for negotiation. If Trump and Carney can't find common ground by August 1st, the fallout could rival the trade wars of the 1930s, when tariffs deepened the Great Depression. The question isn't just whether the U.S. can weather this storm, it's whether American families can afford the cost. Comment below, because the next few weeks will shape not just your grocery bill, but the future of millions of jobs across North America. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay informed.